Okay, now when I was a news reporter, I would conduct what would be a newspaper investigation of some political corruption or police corruption. And I could only have access to the information that is publicly available. I can go to someone and say, did you accept a bribe from this guy? Or did you pay a bribe to this guy? I don't have evidence to prove that, but I can ask the question. And that person may be intimidated and may say, yeah, I did. And I then say, well, I want to see the receipts or whatever. And I can get that, but that's all voluntary. It's all from whatever was out there in the public domain. A technique that reporters use is to get friendly with people in official positions who are on the inside, let's say in a police department, a detective, patrol person, whatever. You want to get close to them so that you can get what they have. Mind you, as a reporter, I wouldn't have the power of subpoena. I wouldn't have the power of a search warrant. All the stuff that our legal system is structured for investigators to investigate. That's the mechanism that gets you into evidence. So reporters are often on the outskirts of evidence, but they look to find ways to get close to that evidence. And then when they have a source who does say, I know what's in the Epstein files because I've read it, and they will share it with me. I then want to find someone else who can collaborate it, and then I can quote the material as coming from an anonymous source. And so, and police and others can go crazy and try to prosecute me for doing that and all of it, but that's kind of how that works. It is particularly disturbing when the government investigators are told you can't investigate this. You can investigate that, but if you go after this, I'm going to declare that a red line and I'm going to fire you. I will. It's only if I have that power to do that. It's extraordinary. And what's essential for viewing the Russian collusion is that Donald Trump placed parameters around the investigation so that they could not look at his finances. Now, whenever you start any investigation like they had with Russian collusion, it begins with follow the money. I mean, it's basic for conducting an investigation. But the Mueller special counsel was limited in not being able to look at the finances. And there's two parts of the Trump saga. One involves money laundering, and the other is Russia's injection of itself into the presidential campaign of 2016. Both are intertwined. And to prove that case, you would need official power to subpoena, to go into records, and to uncover where did the money come from. Um, the and so it's Russia's actions in the campaign were considered an intelligence operation. They had remember we talked about when Trump first became associated with Russians. and that was in New York as he was buying TVs. And there they identified him as a potential asset. That doesn't mean he's an agent. It just means this is a guy we can exploit. And so he's not bringing you secret documents like, say, Aldrich Ames did, the CIA guy who gave away files. He was considered an agent more than an asset, because when they wanted something, they'd send him a message and say, get us this information. In the case of Trump, he was an asset. He was someone they could use to disrupt the American political system. And as time came on, they became more effective at doing it. Their process of injecting money into his campaign, into social media campaigns. Mind you, representatives of the Trump campaign met with Russian KGB officials to give them their campaign plan. So the connection is really very deep. And so for this class, I have turned to a news outlet that is the Australian Broadcast Company. This is a three-part documentary that I've chopped down into small segments. And this here is to look at what happens in the beginning. If I were running an operation for the Russians, if I was on their side, I would begin by surveilling America. And I would also already have some people in place living a normal life that is, they're not getting any trouble or anything like that, but they're there to give me information, intelligence on what is the pulse of America.
It starts with a road trip across America in 2014. Before the US presidential campaign was underway, before Donald Trump was a serious candidate, two Russian spies were crisscrossing the country, gathering intelligence on the US political system, looking for and finding vulnerabilities.
Two of the defendants allegedly traveled to the United States in 2014 to collect intelligence for their American influence operations.
Initially and traditionally, these kinds of operations are very innocent in their overt behavior and appearance. But that was just kind of foundation building, establish a presence, get online, and again, they for a long time would appear to be innocent, but turns out after a time that they weren't.
The spies were the forward team from the infamous internet research agency in St. Petersburg, the frontline organization in Vladimir Putin's asymmetrical war against US democracy.
For me, I've seen a lot of bad stuff in 50 years in intelligence, but it's very, very disturbing, just viscerally disturbing, that an adversary country was so aggressively meddling in our political process.
What was different when you say viscerally disturbing? What was different?
When I came to understand the magnitude and the aggressiveness and the dimensions of this, it was viscerally, it made me ill.
It made you ill?
Yeah.
Did you share that with your colleagues?
Yes. I think it affected all of us that way.
The spies left America undetected. The intelligence they gathered would fuel the cyber war in the coming presidential election.
The idea, underlying idea of Mr. Putin, in my mind, was to try to disturb the situation as much as possible, to create different tensions, points of tensions, points of social discontent, of political fighting. So to create turbulence in the stable society, to make America weak. The idea of Donald Trump to make America great again, the idea of Vladimir Putin to make American institutions weaker.
Do you have any doubt at all about Putin's authorship of the campaign against America?
I do not. You have to remember Putin's personal history. He's a KGB officer. And so I think there's an innate resentment and aversion to the United States and what we stand for and our system.
Well, you need somebody, because politicians are all talk, no action.
The Russians are famous for interfering in elections, theirs and other people's. And then when candidate Trump became very viable, particularly when he became the Republican nominee, then they were attracted to him because they thought he would be much better for them. Businessman, negotiator, deal maker, someone who had been exposed to Russia.
Would Russian intelligence look at Trump's business career as a vulnerability that they could exploit?
Well, absolutely. That's kind of standard tradecraft, goes back to Soviet era. The stock and trade of Russian tradecraft is compromise of some compromising material of some sort, whether real or contrived.
Just to interrupt for a moment, I have difficulty believing that in 2015, he did not know that Trump was laundering money with the Russians. It just would seem impossible to me.
I've arrived in Washington to find it in the grip of a sort of madness. A special prosecutor is investigating whether the US president colluded with a foreign power. Whatever else emerges from that extraordinary investigation, Donald Trump's enthusiasm for Vladimir Putin and his refusal to condemn Russia's interference in the election are already on the record. The question that follows is why. Almost everything about Donald Trump is eventually about money. So is the answer to his bizarre attitude towards Putin lying in his business dealings? For decades, Trump and his family had made numerous attempts to launch the Trump brand in Russia.
I'm going to spend quite a bit of time in Moscow looking at deals. I've looked at everything from resort to hotel.
Russia wanted it, Moscow wanted it.
He had always bragged about getting things done in Russia.
Do you have a relationship with Vladimir Putin?
I do have a relationship, and I can tell you that he's very interested in what we're doing here today.
He bragged on a number of occasions of being close to Putin when he wasn't, of having access to Putin when he didn't. I suspect during most of that time, people in the Kremlin were filling up small glasses of vodka, clinking it with each other, and laughing at Donald Trump's expense because I think they saw him as something of a clown.
Tim O'Brien has been covering Donald Trump since the late 80s, including in his 2005 book, Trump Nation.
I spent a lot of time with him. We traveled around the country on his jet. I was in all of his homes with him. He and Melania and I went to Palm Beach. When the book came out, he didn't cotton to it. He didn't feel very good about it, and he ultimately sued me for defamation. I think it's the biggest libel lawsuit in U.S. history. He sued me for $5 billion.
Hi, Mom.
Trump lost.
It was injudicious because He was suing me for financial portions of the book, which in the litigation opened him up to discovery around his finances and his banking records and his business history. So we got his tax returns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Remember when the casinos go bust, Trump is deeply in debt. He has no way to pay it, but then suddenly the Russians show up.
But Trump's business career has known extravagant success and failure. In the early 1990s, his business empire came close to collapse.
You handle it, Matt.
He bought an airline, he bought a major hotel, he bought a football team, he expanded his casinos beyond both his ability and the size of the market he was in. He got overly leveraged on various important real estate properties he was involved with, and suddenly the piper came calling.
Remember the 80s, the yuppies, the buyouts, the junk bonds, and especially the Donald.
The man who was the darling of the 80s is seen in the 90s as a man in trouble, and he knows it.
Trump found himself on the financial precipice. He had guaranteed personally almost $900 million in loans. He owed some of the biggest banks in the U.S. about $3.6 billion, and he couldn't pay back any of it.
Here in New York, Trump's town is where you find the people who've jousted with him for decades and gotten to know the darker side of his deal-making. Attorney Ken McCallion fought Trump for underpaying contractors on the iconic Trump Tower, but his first experience with him was in the 1970s.
I knew the Trump Organization back when I was a prosecutor. His attorney was Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn went on to become basically a mob lawyer, a very good one, but still an organized crime lawyer in New York. And he basically became a mentor for Donald Trump.
A series of bankruptcies had made Donald Trump a very unsafe bet.
When he had about 4 bankruptcies, particularly of the New Jersey casinos, a lot of the traditional sources of cash, of investment monies, namely U.S. banks, didn't want anything to do with the Trump Organization, with Trump at that particular point.
Not for the first time in his checkered career, Trump got lucky. A new source of revenue was flowing into the international real estate market from Russia.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, billions of dollars left Russia. We see this incredible capital flight happening at this time, and money is going into across the globe, but really a lot of it goes into international capitals, into real estate.
All the Trump projects were largely financed, predominantly financed, well over 50%, with Russian and former Soviet Union financial and money cash sources.
Donald Trump Jr. famously said most of the family's assets are come in from Russia. I think what he's actually talking about are condominium sales. He's talking about units in these various Trump properties that change hands. And it's important to remember that Hong Kong, London, and New York, all in the real estate communities, are the center of a lot of this loose money. Some of it's dirty, undoubtedly. Some of it's being laundered, undoubtedly.
Do we know whether any of that laundered money ended up in Trump properties?
Well, I think the biggest example of this, and I think it's one of the most troubling, is a project that used to be known as the Trump Soho in Lower Manhattan that is alleged in court papers to have been a conduit for money being laundered from Eastern Europe and through people who had organized crime backgrounds and people that Trump himself knew to have organized crime backgrounds. And I know he knew because we asked him about it in a deposition in our litigation.
So you want to be the next?
Soho is a dangerous point for the president because there is so much public information available about his business partners, about where the money came from, and about the nature of the project that raise very serious questions about the president's judgment, his ethics, the kind of people he went into business with.
One of Trump's principal partners in the Soho project was Felix Sater. Trump and Sater have a long history of business partnerships, which continued well into the presidential campaign.
Felix Sater is a career criminal born in the former Soviet Union. He moves to Brighton Beach, Brooklyn with his family. He ultimately becomes a world-class scammer and an assault artist. He goes to jail after sticking a broken margarita glass into the face of someone in a bar with whom he had a disagreement. He gets out of jail and he ends up in a what we would call in the United States a boiler room operation. It's an investing scam that targets vulnerable or ignorant people.
The end of a long drive in the leafy suburbs of Long Island seems a world away from Manhattan. It's home to Trump's notorious partner, Felix Sater.
Hi. How are you? How are you, sir?
How do you do?
Come on in.
Thank you very much.
Make yourself comfortable.
What's it like to be caught up in the way that you are in the story of the century?
It feels stranger than anything you could ever imagine. It's just wild. You wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror and say, wow, is this really happening?
Sater and his relationship with Trump are central to the allegations of Russian money laundering in Trump real estate.
The narrative that's being pushed around right now, that real estate is a way to launder money, possibly, but so is art, yachts, planes, cars. Will we shut down all this commerce? Because certain people who do have dirty money and do launder it do sometimes use those avenues to launder them. We try to sell a product. We try to find our customer. And if at that moment the Russians are good customers, then they're good customers. This whole conversation about Russia, 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 if you really just peel back and look at it, were we trying to sell to Russians? Yes. Were we trying to sell to Brazilians? Yes. Were we trying to sell to people in El Salvador? No. You know why? They don't have as much money.
Trump's partner rejects the label career criminal.
I was involved in a Wall Street stock fraud. I got into a bar fight, lost my license. Didn't have any means of supporting myself, my young child, my wife, or paying for the attorneys to try to fight the case. And I, unfortunately, made the wrong choice and started doing something wrong.
When you ask people who's Felix Sater, they'll say mob background, glassed a guy with a margarita, got involved in stock fraud. That's who he is.
Well, I was 25 years old, and I'm 52 years old right now. I don't understand how somebody could characterize a 52-year-old man by what a 25-year-old kid did.
That kid grew up here when his family fled the Soviet Union in the 70s. The southern end of Brooklyn is home to so many Russian emigres. It's known as Little Odessa. The neighborhood is also famous for its concentration of Mafia families.
Growing up in Brooklyn, there was a lot of people who were involved, who were mob guys or not mob guys. So you sort of knew who they were, and it was the epicenter of, we're talking about Brighton Beach, Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, which is sort of a main place where a lot of them are.
He might have grown up here amongst the Mafia and the Russian mob, but after his run-ins with the law, he secretly turned against the gangsters. Investigations in the American media recently revealed that Sater led an extraordinary double life for 2 decades as an asset for US intelligence and the FBI.
I'm trying to tick through in my head your potential enemies. Al-Qaeda, Cosa Nostra, Russian mob, Russian criminals, North Koreans.
In 20 years, I think I've done a variety of many different things with the U.S. government, both with DIA, CIA, FBI, Secret Service. We laughed at the concept.
Like me, you may find this plot twist hard to believe.
He's a Russian gangster.
But he's not the Russian gangster.
No, not even close.
Don't just take our word for it. His role as a government asset was described by President Obama's Attorney General Loretta Lynch like this. Felix Sater provided information crucial to national security and the conviction of over 20 individuals, including those responsible for committing massive financial fraud and members of La Cosa Nostra.
Needless to say, I find it difficult to believe that someone who is an informant against La Cosa Nostra is still alive. It just doesn't happen that way.
Felix Sater first ventured into the New York real estate business in 2000. He joined a property development company called Bayrock and set up offices in Trump Tower, 2 floors below Donald Trump.
Once we were there, I decided to stop and knock on his door and tell him that we should start doing business together.
And how did he respond?
He laughed because I walked in and told him I'm going to be the biggest developer in New York City and you should get in early now while, before it's too late. And he laughed and introduced me to some other members of the staff.
Felix and his other partners at Bayrock end up going out of the town with Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka. Felix ends up escorting Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka around Moscow as the Trumps look for potential deals there.
Why Moscow? What's the appeal of Moscow?
Oh, like any other capital, wealthy place with people who can afford to buy units at a very good price, and we could make money and have a beautiful building.
Sater's timing was good. He arrived with Russian connections exactly when Donald Trump was targeting Russian customers for his US real estate ventures.
They had very close Russian connections through Sater, through Sater's partners in Bayrock. It not only, a lot of the Russian, when I say Russian, former Soviet Union money, went not only in buying some apartments and units in Trump Soho, but also went to the, directly into the organization itself.
Over the years, we know with Trump Soho, they marketed directly to the Russian consumers from the post-Soviet states that had a lot of cash on hand. They provided a means to circumvent traditional banks because these are consumers who don't need mortgages, who don't need to go through bank checks. They show up with a lot of cash, millions of dollars, and they purchase the unit.
There was a very sophisticated program of marketing to Russians. Obviously, there's a lot of money in...
Not true. Not true.
Brochures are pretty posh.
They're very posh, but we were just as sophisticated about marketing to South America.
They end up pursuing 3 deals together. A real estate project in Phoenix that fails, a project in Florida that fails, and then ultimately the Trump Soho in Manhattan, which opens to great fanfare, but also ultimately fails. Why did Bayrock keep having so much money pour into it when all the projects it was touching were failing? And there's sort of a classic warning signal when law enforcement investigators are looking at a business that is cash rich, but the businesses themselves keep failing, as to whether or not that business is trying to turn itself into a washing machine for dirty money.
Enter Putin and the KGB.
In the heart of Moscow is the place that best represents what Vladimir Putin stands for. The Lubyanka, the headquarters of the old KGB.
Putin sees himself still very much as a member of that corporation, as a member of that brotherhood.
That brotherhood is now called the FSB, but it still operates inside the Lubyanka. Next door is a large toy store with a giant neon Pinocchio. A reminder that in this city, spies like Vladimir Putin have always been the puppet masters.
Whenever he can, he has reaffirmed his allegiance to the Russian secret police. He is still a KGB agent. That's how he sees himself.
I think you have to remember how things work in Russia. No big decisions are made. They all go to one guy, Putin. So certainly what Putin is doing is waging warfare against the United States. That wouldn't be going on without not just his acquiescence or his blessing, but his active direction. And again, remember his background. He's a KGB product.
James Clapper was Obama's Director of National Intelligence, the most senior intelligence official in the US during the election campaign.
And there's a long history of their trying to involve themselves and influence elections in our country since at least the 1960s, but never, ever as aggressive, direct, and multi-dimensional as this interference in our election process. They clearly were interested in the Russians were, I think, in penetrating the Trump campaign.
Again, this is very troubling to me because there's loads of signs going on long before this point in time. And there were many opportunities to investigate where the money was coming from. The Treasury Department had fined Trump $10 million for violating rules. And this is back in the 1990s. So, I mean, for what Clapper is essentially saying is it just, it comes as a shock that what happened.
Only a week earlier, as the candidates were doing their debate prep, a former spy arrived discreetly in the US Capitol on a mission involving the presidential election. Not a Russian spy in this case, but an ex-MI6 agent and Russia expert, now working as a corporate investigator. His name was Christopher Steele.
He was hired in the spring of 2016 by Fusion GPS, a lobbying firm. The ultimate client was the Democratic Party. Chris didn't know that, but the question was, what is Donald Trump's relationship with Russia? So he funneled this out to his secret sources, and he waited.
Steele was an MI6 agent in Moscow in the 1990s. As a private investigator, he'd worked on Russian cases for decades.
The former head of our Secret Service had a very high opinion of him, and that his professional colleagues that I know also had a good opinion as to his professional honesty and commitment. Like any senior British intelligence officer, he would have had close relations with various branches of US intelligence.
In mid-2016, Steele's sources had provided shocking answers to the question about Trump's links to Russia.
What his sources were telling him was that essentially there was a conspiracy. First of all, there was a real-time espionage operation to try and affect the outcome of the 2016 election and to push Donald Trump across the line.
Steele first passed the information to the FBI, but believing they'd taken no action, decided to meet with a hand-picked group of journalists, including veteran Washington reporter Michael Isikoff.
It was at a private room at the Tabard Inn, and it was all business. I mean, Steele was there. It was clear he took this matter very seriously. I think that he thought he was sitting on some bombshell information that deserved to get out.
The former spy had gathered raw intelligence into a dossier about members of the Trump campaign and their links to Russia. The information Isikoff focused on was about the recent trip to Moscow of a Trump foreign policy advisor called Carter Page.
He told me that Page had meetings in Moscow in which he discussed the Trump campaign and help that the Russians could provide the Trump campaign in exchange for which Trump would be favorably disposed to lift sanctions on Russia. But what really got my attention was he said that he had
so much for that.
to the FBI because he believed it was a national security matter.
Carter Page worked in Moscow for US bank Merrill Lynch in 2004 for 3 years. At the time, Sergei Alexishenko was chairman of Merrill Lynch Moscow. He worked with Carter Page. Alexishenko was also deputy chairman of the Russian Central Bank.
He spent several years in Moscow, but he was not able to speak Russian fluently.
Did he stand out in the company?
No. He left Merrill Lynch, it seems to me it was in 2007, and 2007, when he recognized he will not be promoted. At least from the time I know him, he was very naive, and as I read what he said in interviews, what he read in Moscow, how he behaved himself in Moscow, he was very naive.
He said he was an informal advisor to the Kremlin. Does that sound like the Carter you know?
Nothing close to the truth. Yeah. Look, he was, once again, he was a very, very medium-level guy with no exceptional relationships.
I honestly am not sure I can sort him out in my own mind, whether he was doing something nefarious or was just naive. I don't know. But I do know that he was a matter of concern to the FBI since he was on their scope since about 2013 for his interactions with known Russian operatives.
With no proper vetting of its hastily announced team, the Trump campaign was unaware that only a few years earlier, Carter Page was groomed as an asset by Russian spies. The spy There's a strong sense in which those bells are tolling for Vladimir Putin. By immersing himself in Russian tradition, he's made himself a modern Tsar. He embodies nostalgia for Russia's past greatness and the more recent power of the Soviet Empire. But the dark side of that nostalgia is a potent sense of grievance, a grievance that the world has undermined or taken away Russia's rightful place in the world. Putin believes the West has conspired against his Russia. It's one of the reasons he feels justified in conspiring against them.
The more inflated his image of himself becomes, the bigger the enemy needs to be. Like, who is he protecting Russia from? Well, it can only be the United States. As far as Putin is concerned, and as far as most Russians are concerned, Russia has been at war with the United States, not a Cold War, but a hot war, in Ukraine since 2014.
Putin's sense of grievance was inflamed when the US imposed economic sanctions. in retaliation for Russia's military assault on Ukraine and annexation of Crimea.
Russia's decision to send troops into Crimea has rightly drawn global condemnation. I'm authorizing sanctions on Russian officials, entities operating in the arms sector in Russia, and individuals who provide material support to senior officials of the Russian government.
The most comprehensive set of sanctions against the Russian government ever in hundreds of years of history between the United States and Russia. The Russian government and the Russian business community was shocked. Never before in history has the chief of staff of the president of Russia been on a sanctions list. That is something remarkable and new.
As much as Obama's actions hurt Russia, Vladimir Putin remained intractable.
Есть ли, тем не менее, какие-то обстоятельства, если представить, при которых вы были бы готовы отдать Крым и Севастополь?
Вы что, с ума сошли, что ли? Нет таких обстоятельств и не будет никогда.
In 2016, as the presidential race in the United States narrowed to two candidates, the Russians were watching closely.
They're astute students of the United States. They have expertise on us, and they understand our country very well. They maintain a very large and sophisticated spying apparatus within the United States. They watch our television, they read our publications, they read our newspapers.
The people of Crimea, from what I've heard, would rather be with Russia than where they were. And you have to look at that also.
They figured that Trump would be much better to deal with on a whole range of issues, and certainly among which would be sanctions, or perhaps being more benign or treating the situation in Ukraine more benignly than the prior administration or a Clinton administration would.
Again, my view of this is that there had to be someone inside of the intelligence or FBI milieu who was connecting the dots between the Russians and the Trump organization. Because when you look at it, this isn't something that just came up. We're talking from the 1970s to 2016. There's a lot there. We've looked at all these interactions, all these things that are going on between them. We know the Soviet Union has fallen. We know that the oligarchs and Putin are looting the country. That means their money has to get cleaned. And they're out there doing it. We know they are. Trump gets bailed out by them. This didn't just come up in 2015. Okay, Dave, we can open up for comments, discussion, whatever works.
Oops. Please use the raise your hand function and ask a short, succinct question. Let everybody else talk, and then we'll come back to you. Query, Sal. If Russia got ripped off a lot of money in Russia, and they basically controlled everything, why did they need to launder the money?
Because that money was in rubles. And they didn't, and the oligarchs and others, and Putin, were not banking on Russia returning as a world power. The ruble was down the drain. So what they want to do is take it off to the west, and they want to convert it into clean money and to have it ready for them in the West.
Lewis.
Thank you, Sal. Yeah, this is
all interesting and very disturbing. Question for you about some of the things that have been happening recently. This Judge Cannon in Florida has, or it's being claimed, she has bottled up the Jack Smith inquiry into the top secret papers at Mar-a-Lago forever. Is that possible to do? And also, I think it's rather interesting. Some news came out that her husband, Josh, somebody, works for John Rossetti's company, who happens to be a very notorious mobster, correct? What do you think about that can of fish?
Well, I think it's horrific, but mind you, that her decision will be appealed, I suspect. Maybe not, because the Justice Department isn't going to appeal it so that the report can come out. So I guess it would have to be, private citizens that take a case to the 11th Circuit. But I've talked before about how corrupt we've become, and I know it's hard to contemplate the tentacles of the Koch organization and those who gathered together in the John Birch Society post World War II, who were determined to tear down America. They wanted to drive a wedge between Americans and their government. And they corrupted the system. These were very smart people, and they put together long-term strategies to corrupt the government and to dismantle it. And so what we're seeing, the Eileen Cannons of today, they didn't just pop up 2 years ago or 3 years ago. This is a product of a long-term assault upon America. And I know we had officials in the FBI who dealt only with public corruption cases. Well, again, the way you constrain that is you don't give it all the money it needs. You keep people distracted on issues like street crime, which need to be addressed. But that ain't our biggest crime problem. Our biggest crime problem is white collar crime by orders of magnitude that are substantial. How about local police department? How come they don't have, a public corruption entity to go and investigate, what's going on with local officials? So what I'm saying is, Eileen Cannon is a manifestation of a corrupted system. They brought that case to her, that area of Florida, in the hope that she would get assigned the case. And of course, there is a random selection process, but they have a large bench. So if she wasn't doing it, there'd be somebody else.
Norman?
The US dollar has been falling in value. So is it likely that the folks who are laundering money in the United States will move to Europe or Switzerland, where the value is higher relative to the US dollar?
Well, they have been laundering their money through, banks in Cyprus and Switzerland and Germany and, all over the place. I mean, they really, remember, Putin was a KGB officer. And now, as head of country, he's one of the richest people in the world. So it's the magnitude of how much they have stolen out of Russia and how much they had to clean. It wasn't, America was number one on the list, but that's on a list. There are many other banks that they were going to. I think we may come to the point where the ruble will go up in value and we'll be laundering American dollars to get them into the ruble. I mean, that could be a joke, but that's also a potential. We are in deep trouble right now when you have a psychopath who's a criminal in the head of the country and with control over the entire apparatus of the law enforcement system. We're in great trouble. I can't even imagine that we would survive 2 more years, but that's my negative view. But I mean, I just have to say that a long time ago, Trump was on the radar screen from my perspective. And there was more than enough to justify opening a preliminary investigation, which is what they did with the Fountain Blue. Um, and they realize he's connected with the mob, and the mob wants him to take over this hotel. What's going on there? Why any investigator worth their salt would hang on to that like a dog with a bone? That was it was obvious what was going on. And when
By the
he goes
way,
broke, and suddenly he gets an infusion of money.
by the way, in response to Lewis's question, a party would have to intervene in that case in Judge Cannon's court. And there are two kinds of intervention. One intervention by right, and the other is intervention which is discretionary. And this would be discretionary since the party would not be necessary party to that action. And it's unlikely that Judge Cannon would grant that. And I presume that could be appealed to the 11th Circuit, but it's unlikely they would be successful.
And that's one of the clearest open and shut cases in the short term that could convict Trump of
The
criminality.
problem is having an adequate party to do it.
No, I understand, but I'm just saying is that the evidence is clearly there on TV. It's not going to take. I wonder now, though, with all the people who have been kicked out of the FBI and inspectors general. As a reporter, I would be knocking on their doors to get them as an anonymous source. And I'm sure they have a lot to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lauren?
So most everything that you have presented here was actually on TV prior to the 2016 election, not nearly so neatly packaged to follow a great story. So it was all given piecemeal, a little bit here, a little bit there, and it wasn't as additive as you've been able to point out here. But the pieces have all been there. So I'm trying to understand, and maybe the forces of money are so great, but a lot of this has been known for a very, very long time. As you point out, well before his first election. How is it that he has just escaped everything forever? I mean, this is a little bit, well, A, mind-boggling, B, extremely disappointing, and C, actually distressing.
Yeah, it should be scary more than right? Distressing. Well, my theory is that Trump's cozying up to the assistant director of the FBI who was running the New York office, Kallstrom, that relationship blocked serious investigations stemming from the New York FBI office, although Southern District of New York, the prosecutor's office, should have picked up on it. I mean, they had to be aware of it too. Um, and
there seems like there's innumerable offices based on what you have presented to us that even without the additive effect that you have presented here, even in the individual cases, seem like they should have been followed up on and something done.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the stuff that I'm presenting was the materials that were gathered by news reporters and those who went off to news reporters who then went off to write a book about it and did research on it and were, simply they didn't have subpoena power. They didn't, they didn't have a search warrant, So if they're able to gather this, the people who do have those powers were able to do a hell of a lot more. And there was more than.
That's what I'm thinking. I just don't understand how it has gone on for so long.
Yeah. Well, and again, I would relate back to that class about the Trump landscape, because I think we have to look at what has been the political landscape of America and who has shaped that. And Trump, from a political standpoint, what he did is he capitalized upon racial animus in America. That's what he did. And it shows how deep racial animus is.
And continues to. I mean, right from let's ban all Muslims to let's get them folks from Africa out of here. And I mean, he's actively still pursuing all of this. So
the only thing he's been consistent about is racial animus.
Yeah, he's for sure a racist. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Lewis?
Sal, to carry on with Lauren's comments there. So let's go back to the Biden administration. What happened with Merrick Garland? Is he culpable now in not having taken action earlier on some of these things? And why would he do it? What are your thoughts about what happened, let's say, with the Justice Department during Biden's administration?
Yeah. First off, the way I think is that when the insurrectionists attacked the Capitol on January 6th, that was a closed facility, no trespassing allowed, and like any government facility that's in that designation, you can. The reason we give those guards guns is they can use them. And what blows my mind is that they did not use them. If I were running security at that point, it would have been a bloodbath. I'm sorry, it's just if you attack a nuclear plant, right? We have people more than prepared to shoot at you. So it's, again, it was to have the same level of security. It was no one is to be on this property except for those legislators. But they didn't do that. And when it's over, Merrick Garland is faced with, do I prosecute the opponent who lost the election, and do I violate the norms that said we would not take, the Justice Department and use it for a political endeavor? Well, it wasn't for a political endeavor. There was a crime committed. And so he was dragged into it to start. I mean, mind you, the Justice Department did not jump on investigating the people who attacked. It was groups of citizens who took the videos and started working to identify who the perpetrators were, and then posting that on social media. So it was an organic investigation that should have been an FBI investigation from day one, but it wasn't. And so they're dragging their feet, and a lot of it is because they know what are the norms and mores, and they don't know what to do when they're facing someone who doesn't care about them, who isn't going to play in the sandbox by the rules of the sandbox. Donald Trump was going to violate everything. And when you're facing something like that, you've got to say, the hell with the norms. I'm going to follow the law now. But he was reticent doing that. Then he starts with building the case from the bottom up. So we'll prosecute, we will investigate. When they finally get kicking and dragged into it, and they're doing the investigation on the insurrectionist, you have the House. They haven't started investigating Trump. They haven't begun. I mean, what the hell are you doing? I mean, I have to say, I was, my brain is exploding. For God's sake, pick him up. I mean, it's like this is if if a little person perpetrates a little crime, they get cuffed and taken to jail. This guy tries to overthrow the government, and the federal authorities are yawning. I mean, it's terrible. And Biden was not going to tell Merrick Garland what to do. He lived by that rule that it's independent. But really, it's the House investigation. And really, it's Liz Cheney who becomes the voice of credibility, because she's a Republican and she's on the committee and she's a good lawyer, and she has really exposed what the hell was going on. It's only after that the Justice Department opened an investigation into Trump. And then they ran out of time. I mean,
are we seeing the British government and the Norwegian government and their actions so quickly on the Epstein files where they appeared over there versus what we have done here?
Right. It's what a law enforcement agency should do. I mean, you have evidence of the crime. Pick them up. And continue your investigation. Again, the material that's presented here is drawn from reporters doing their job and authors doing their job without subpoena power. I mean, there's some like Tim O'Brien. They could get Trump on a deposition, so it's the equivalent of a search warrant, if you will, but an arrest warrant, whatever you want to call it. It has some legal punch to it. The people who had that legal punch failed. And I don't care, Democrat, Republican. It's what they did, and we are at terrible risk of losing the country.
Yes, you
are. On that happy note, what's happening next week?
Next week, I'm going to present the class will be about professional psychologists and their assessment of Trump. And, people have a difficult time accepting mental illness or mental disorders. It seems very far away from them. But that's really one of the problems we're dealing with, is that we have these it's like the people who want to dismantle American democracy. It's for their own building of a kingdom. That's a it really is a greedy sickness, a narcissistic disease. And if we don't address it, it ain't going to go away.
Well, if you look at it as a disease, don't you diminish the mens rea? And I can't see diminishing that.
I don't think so. Just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean you're not culpable for the crime. It may explain what's going on in you, but it's not. Look, here's the distinction that I make. Remember Charles Whitlam, the guy who shot up people at the University of Texas in the 1960s? It was a big case. Many of you aren't old enough. I'm much older than you, so I remember this. Charles Whitlam went into the tower and shot people walking across the campus. He had a brain aneurysm. He had a growth on his brain, and it impacted his amygdala and several other areas of the brain. He thought something was wrong, but he couldn't. He had this sense he wanted to act out violently. And so I would take him and I'd say, okay, you're not culpable for the crime in the sense that we're going to put you in prison, but we have to remove you from society and get you treatment and try to fix your brain. That's a distinction I can make. But being a psychopath.
The Clintons will be deposed by the House Oversight Committee.
Being a psychopath does not, in my mind, give an excuse for the crimes that you perpetrated.
How about being a narcissist?
Only an explanation.
Yeah, it's an explanation. It helps you
but not an excuse.
What's going on with that person, but it's not an excuse.
So we will get into the psychological weeds next week.
Yes.
And if everybody can unmute and thank Sal for another sobering presentation.
Thank you, Sal.
Thank you, Sal.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Sal.
coming.
Thank you,
Thank
Sal.
you.